Keir Starmer is going to be leaving Number 10 very shortly, doubtless, and his legacy is not a legacy of having put our defence onto a firm footing. It's sent us on a track, yes, but it's too little, too late. The 28 billion that the service chiefs were asking for has only been partially funded by 15 billion, and we are now having to accept risk to our security in a way that the Strategic Defence Review pointed out last year was unacceptable.
Keir Starmer sounded proud of his plan to spend an extra £15 billion on defence today, and his ministers, the Chancellor, the Defence Secretary, who stepped up when the last one resigned in protest, led the cheers. But the choreographed applause is already being drowned out by those who are saying it's not enough, that it's far too little and too slow. A veteran military commander, he was a former head of the Navy, demanded bluntly on this show the other day, what's the point of worrying about spending this or that on our public services if we're leaving Britain exposed to being attacked and crushed by Vladimir Putin and his brutal war machine? In a moment here on Drive, we're going to be going through what is called the Defence Investment Plan. We'll try to weigh the perennial demand for more money and better weapons against what is now an urgent warning that our political leaders are failing to keep our country safe. I wonder what you think about that. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. And a little bit later on, Baroness Amos, the author of today's report identifying shocking failures in NHS maternity care, the avoidable deaths, the cover-ups, the racism towards patients and the bullying of staff and patients. She is joining me live. First thing, Keir Starmer, he announced the long-awaited Defence Investment Plan earlier today.
European nations must take more primary responsibility for their own defence. These are the changes and the challenges which have defined my premiership and that will continue to shape our times. My view has been the same since day one. We must stand more firmly on our own 2 feet. We must do what it takes to meet this new world head-on, to keep our country safe and seize the opportunities that come from investing in our sovereign strength.
The Prime Minister also talked about the impact of the plan on the next Prime Minister.
This plan represents our best judgment of what the country needs to meet this moment, and it is a platform on which I know my successor will build.
Now, the new Defence Secretary, Dan Jarvis, he unveiled all the details in the Commons.
Artificial intelligence, autonomy and uncrewed systems are no longer capabilities of the future. And through this dip, they will now receive the sustained investment that reflects their strategic importance. So today, we commit the UK's largest ever investment in drone warfare. £5 billion for strike, protector and surveillance drones across the Royal Navy, the Army and the RAF. Anti-submarine vessels, uncrewed ground vehicles and fighter jets. A new uncrewed systems task force to rapidly develop and field new autonomous capabilities. And funding for Europe's biggest drone testing site, the Uncrewed Systems Centre in Swindon.
The Defence Secretary speaking in the Commons. First now, let's welcome Larisa Brown, the Defence Editor at The Times. Hi to you, Larisa.
Hi, John.
Great to have you here, Larisa. So it's taken over a year, hasn't it, to get this report completed and published after the delays and the internal wrangling, and along the way, the resignation of 2 defence ministers who were protesting about inadequate funding. So now you've been through the final version. Tell me, what are your big takeaways?
Yes, it's been a pretty painful year, and yes, it's an 80-page document. There are some detailed costings for the next 4 years, but quite crucially, there aren't detailed costings for the years after that. Now, this is meant to be a 10-year plan, so obviously that seems quite extraordinary to begin with. Starmer has announced this £15 billion uplift, which is extra money for the next 4 years. So you can quite clearly see that that's going into drones. There's £5 billion spent on drones. There's going to be more than £8 billion spent on the GCAP programme. That's the Tempest combat aircraft. There's also money there for the Ajax armoured fighting vehicle. We've talked about that lots because it was making troops feel sick. And there's money there for Challenger tanks as we expected. There's also some talk of programmes that will be scrapped. There'll be ships retired early. We kind of had an idea of that, but there's also Wildcat helicopters that are being retired early that we didn't know about previously. It's a pretty substantial document. It's taken a while to go through, but yes, the clear standout point for me is that there isn't funding after 2029.
Right, and as you have been reporting for a while, and as we then have been expecting, the extra money over the period adds up to £15 billion, which of course is well below what was recommended by service chiefs. I mean, the chief of the defence staff, he wanted, what was it, 28 billion. The National Security Advisor was talking about 18 billion behind the scenes. And can you see anything that might put some of those who expected to be disappointed by all of this, put some of their fears to rest, or will it just bear out what they were worried about?
Well, the black hole in the plans overall was 28 billion. So they've only committed 15 billion pounds extra. So that obviously leaves an awful a lot of money that they've got to find. There's actually 10.7 billion referred to in this document in what they've described as efficiency savings that they've got to make. Now they've said that those efficiency savings aren't contingent on the rest of everything going to plan. So everything's still going to happen whether they make those savings or not. But clearly, a lot of the bigger programs, whilst they might have funding for the next 4 years, they've not got funding after that, and that makes it incredibly hard for the defence chiefs to plan what they're going to do in the coming years. And of course, a lot of these programs, they do take years to build. So some of these warships, some of the fighter jets. And so really, the department really wants that certainty. And
it is absolutely fair to say then, Larisa, finally, that we should see this report, the result of all this work over a year, as a step along the way. It's the beginning of a new phase of debate, more wrangling, more horse trading. We just had John Healey on social media, and he spoke in the House of Commons saying this was the beginning. There was more work to be done.
Well, John Healey is making the point, which is pretty crucial, that there's nothing in here that sets out a clear pathway to reaching 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, and also that 3.5% figure that we've committed to in NATO, which we're meant to be reaching by 2035. And that is a real sticking point for many of the MPs who have been speaking in the Commons today, because they're saying that we absolutely need a clear pathway to reaching these targets. And I think that's the main point that Healey's trying to make as well.
All right, Larisa, thank you so much. Larisa Brown there, Defence Editor at The Times. Now, let us welcome to the programme Lord Dannatt, who's the former Chief of the General Staff, former head of the Army, live on the line now. Hello to you, Lord Dannatt.
John, good afternoon.
Very welcome. Now, do tell me, what are your thoughts on what you've seen and heard?
Well, this morning the Prime Minister was saying all the right things, but the quantum of the amount of money that he's put on the table is too little and too late. And actions have consequences, and in his case, inactions have consequences. The Strategic Defence Review of last July provided a very thorough analysis of the threats and dangers to our security, and it was to be followed last autumn by this defence investment plan, which was going to match the money to the solution to the threats, the 62 recommendations. Well, that didn't happen. It didn't happen in the autumn, it didn't happen in the winter, didn't happen in the spring, and now it's happened today. But the tragedy is it's taken the resignation of John Healey and Carns to finally get the Prime Minister to wake up that this is really, really serious. Even though he mouthed the right words at the Munich Security Conference back in February, we must get to 3% by the end of this decade. And the result of his inaction is it's given the chance for Andy Burnham to make a push for power. Keir Starmer is going to be leaving Number 10 very shortly, doubtless. And his legacy is not a legacy of having put our defence onto a firm footing. It's sent us on a track, yes, but it's too little, too late. The 28 billion that the service chiefs were asking for has only been partially funded by 15 billion, and we are now having to accept risk to our security in a way that the Strategic Defence Review pointed out last year was unacceptable.
And a word more on the pace of the plan, Richard, because we can see now how Russia is working hard, is struggling to make headway against Ukraine in the war there. Meanwhile, Russia is re-gearing itself as a war economy. It's gearing up and scaling up its capacity on drones and other things. And so the threat is going to grow over time.
Yes, the threat is going to grow over time. And if, as many people expect, at some point there will be a ceasefire in Ukraine, that will provide the opportunity for the Russians to reconstitute and refurbish themselves so that they are ready to go again somewhere. That might be in Ukraine, it might be against one of the Baltic states. And the whole point, if that happens, is that Vladimir Putin would very much like to test Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, to test whether attack on one is an attack on all, and see whether, if he was to make a push into Estonia, not because he wants to recapture Estonia again necessarily, but he wants to test the veracity of NATO's will and NATO's determination. So we are presented with a situation which we've analysed, we understand is dangerous, but we're not fully rising to the challenge of playing our part as what has always been one of the leading European members of NATO, not playing our part fully in the collective security of Europe.
What about our capacity as a country to try to get ahead of the game when it comes to drones and robots and AI and tech, and in that way just get more for less when it comes to building up our military power?
Well, this country has always been marked for innovation, technological development, and of course we can do that, and that is already happening. The experts in the defence field have got great concepts, got great ideas, got great plans, but the speed at which we can roll them out is determined by the amount of money that's available. Yes, £5 billion extra has gone into drone technology, and that's extremely good. But then the question is, how fast can that be applied? How fast can that be rolled out? But it also comes at the reorganising of some other areas of the defence budget, some more conventional, you could say, legacy systems, which are not themselves redundant, but are now going to be underfunded. So we have to hope that the threat in the future is going to look like the threat that we're currently seeing in Ukraine and doesn't have some more traditional characteristics to it, which after all is where the Ukraine war started 4 years ago with conventional attacks by conventional forces.
Do we still need those pieces of equipment you describe as legacy weapons? Like, why do we still need a tank, for example, when it is possible to mount a heavy gun on an autonomous vehicle in the battlefield?
Well, we need a whole range of armoured fighting vehicles, and the main battle tank is still a very potent force on the battlefield. It can manoeuvre, it is well protected, and it has very high capacity of firepower. Now, we don't need to go back to massed armour that we were prepared to face in the days of the Cold War, but it's one of those systems that still has a place on the modern battlefield, supported and protected by drones, and it's the amalgam of all these capabilities that gives us an overall military capability, and that military capability gives us a deterrent posture which should be sufficient, if we properly fund it, to deter further aggression from someone like Vladimir Putin.
All right. Lord Dannatt, former head of the army, good to have you on the show as always. Thank you.